I'm the mother of James, a 12-year-old autistic child with severe self-injurious behaviors and aggression when we try to stop him from hurting himself. We couldn't keep him safe at home any longer. The hospital is an extreme last resort. Length of stay for James was 13 days and the second time 7 weeks. They could do nothing for him to sedate him. I stayed with him there at the hospital as well because there was no trained staff. And if I was there, that meant less sedation because I could restrain him with assistance.
My son, like so many thousands of others, has the same aggressive, self-injurious, and disruptive behaviors that make living in a community group home, a family home, or under an adult foster care living arrangement dangerous and unmanageable. He was put on over 21 different medications. The medications did not manage his behaviors, but he did end up with female-like breasts, Parkinsonian-like tremors, serotonin syndrome, prediabetes, and episodes of psychosis.
This is my son Carson. I call him the man cub. He's 95% teddy bear, but 5% tiger. And I never know when that tiger side is going to emerge. We've tried medications and behavioral interventions, but with little or no success. He has severe meltdowns causing self-injury, and I'm going to warn you, these pictures are vivid. He's bitten all the skin off of his hand, requiring him to have plastic surgery and skin grafts. The first time he bit me, I reached up from the back seat to stop him from jumping out of the car, and I didn't go to the doctor because I was afraid of what they would say or what they would do. Would they take him away? I didn't know. I ended up being in the hospital for 3 days with antibiotic IVs. He will bash his head on the floor. He'll pinch. He will break his teeth off because he bangs his head so severely on the floor and making holes in our walls and causing severe damage to himself and others. He pinches. When I say pinching, that's what it looks like. And he doesn't want to do it. When he's finished having his meltdown, he'll pet the floor where he hit his head, and he'll pet my arm where he bit me. And he'll say, "Sorry, Mom. Sorry, Carson." He even apologizes to himself. So for a guy with few words, he's very sad. He destroys property. He banged his head on the car window and broke the window right out. We're exhausted, and we have PTSD.
I'd like to introduce my son David Joyce over there with the green neck pillow, and my wife Elise. We feared for his safety, potential permanent damage, brain damage. You know, he would strike his fists to his head. He often had bloody noses and ears, or puffed up ears, and severe bruising to his eyes and face. And his self-injurious behaviors averaged at that time 8,000 per day. So, you know, it was just very, very difficult. He also head banged into walls and windows and his own shoulders. He would bite his hands until his skin was raw. And Elise and I, in all of our efforts to try to intervene, we often would get in the middle and have some injuries ourselves from his own self-inflicted behaviors. At the age of 7, we began to utilize strategies that were recommended at the time by the professionals at Kennedy Krieger. We were exposed to ECT, which actually was, I think, saved David's life. He utilized that strategy for a period of 4 years until he had a physical condition which caused us to discontinue those treatments.
My name is Daniel Fairbanks. I'm the Dean of Science at Utah Valley University and also a geneticist. My wife is chair of the Department of Music and a concert violinist. We have a very severely autistic son who is now 26 years old. We've found in our experience that waiting lists, changing regulations, requirements for work when my son will never be able to work, contradictory requirements that often come about have challenged us throughout our careers. And then also as parents, being able to navigate these changing requirements and finding appropriate resources from governmental entities, both working with the federal and state governments, is extremely difficult to the point that we had to hire attorneys, and still do, to help us navigate those and be able to obtain what is needed for our son. We ended up losing all of our home equity and losing our savings in attempting to obtain what my son needed.
My parents were prisoners in their own home. Their grandchildren could not go to their home because of this dangerous environment. My parents could not go to family functions or even have time to themselves because taking James out of the house was incredibly risky. It was devastating to see bruises and teeth marks on my parents, and sad to know that this was their everyday struggle. Imagine that. Bruises, teeth marks, gouge marks on your parents, and there was nothing you can do but just stand by and watch. I was fearful every single day that my parents or James would sustain a major injury and need to be hospitalized. It was painful to witness James endure these episodes. No child should have to struggle with this instability. Everyone suffered. James, my parents, my siblings, and I, and our children. The most devastating moment, and I still have this clear in my mind, was on Christmas Eve. We were so fortunate to have one aide so my family and I could spend time. Everything was going well. James spiraled out of control with a need for 5 of us to restrain him. Yes, 5 adults to restrain this child. This went on for some time, with finally the only option was an ambulance to the hospital. When we arrived at the hospital, it still required 5 of us. No one knew what to do with this child. Autism has a spectrum, mild to severe. Therefore, medical professionals, first responders, etc., need to be trained on how to manage all individuals on that spectrum. That evening, I recall my mom standing in that hospital hallway crying on Christmas Eve. This was the most heartbreaking moment of my life, to see my mom crying with no end in sight.
Hello, my name is Tara McMillan, and I have a son who is impacted by autism. More specifically, he developed encephalitis after his catch-up vaccinations at 17 months of age. This medical emergency was not treated as an emergency, but neglect. Yet, because we were not informed and not educated, my son suffered brain damage without treatment. I am here today to speak about the recent article in Time magazine discussing the study published in JAMA claiming that children with autism were unprotected from vaccine-preventable diseases. Parents of children with autism are not going to continue to go back to the very thing that caused their child's brain injury. Instead of funding a study to better understand why parents refuse to put their children in danger of ACIP guidelines, scientists should be asking what is different in the families of children with autism. Why are they not vaccinating? This is a question that should be asked, and the answers should be pursued without prejudice from the scientists. Thousands of children have been injured by vaccines, and therefore the parents no longer vaccinate. I implore you to seek out the reasons why vaccines harm, instead of seeking to make our children the scapegoats for the failures of the vaccine program in the United States. You don't have to thank Andy or Jenny for that. It's the parents who see their children disappear after the shots. They only want to keep their children safe from more harm. Nothing good could ever come from a needle that once did harm to that child.
So once again, I want to try to focus this group on what this group is able to do. And I think that we heard some suggestions today of things that we would be able to do. We could, for one, as Jerry suggested, identify this as a high priority research area. I want to point out that there's really no research right now that ties self-injurious behaviors to lack of ability to communicate. We don't know what is causing self-injurious behaviors.
Allison, I know that you are a big fan of evidence and scientific method, and we all should be at this table. But as autistic people, I think that it is safe to say that Sam, others have come before this committee and talked for years about how we injure ourselves slamming our heads against the wall in frustration, biting chunks out of our arms because we're frustrated. Why are we frustrated? Because we can't communicate. We don't need a research study to tell us something that has shaped our lives. I don't deny that a research study could quantify it, but that is an example of something that to someone like me just feels outrageous to suggest. Of course communication disability causes those problems. I've lived with them 60 years, for Christ's sake. And to say we need solutions, that is the kind of stuff that enrages the community. And I'm all for finding solutions. By all means, do those studies. But don't let's stand still, and don't let's make people feel that it's being pushed aside over stuff like that.
He continues to this day to have those intermittent outbursts. They're down to maybe 2 a month, but they are very severe when they happen, as you've heard described today. And so he has to, even though it's only a couple times a month, he has to live in an apartment by himself with 2 awake staff at all times and 1 staff overnight. And so this is how his mother describes the problem. This is how her interpretation of it is: due to his inability to manage his emotions and communicate, he attacks us when he becomes agitated or stressed. This behavior is very unpredictable, often occurs with little to no warning signs. It's happened in our home, his school, in the community, sometimes while driving a car. It's so bad we can no longer safely live in our home with Ryan.
This speaks very strongly to me that it is perhaps time to recast our strategic plans so that we can most effectively communicate what we need both to the leadership of NIH and to the leadership in our government who reads the plan.
So Stuart Shapiro from CDC. There's been a lot of interest in CDC's report on the prevalence of autism spectrum disorder in 8-year-old children in 11 communities in the United States. And there have been some questions to me here at the meeting about it, and where is that report? And so I'm announcing that CDC strives to publish this report in the MMWR early during Autism Awareness Month every other year. And that's the goal, to do it early, but it's a complex report, and it's a comprehensive publication, and this time around has required a lot of expert involvement in the publication, but I am very pleased to report today that it will be published during Autism Awareness Month. So I'm pleased to share with you that the report will be released April 26th by the MMWR. That's the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report.